Hey,
Oh, nice.
Larry, you kept true to your
I
promise,
I
and you
did.
brought a guest this week.
I will say that it was a last minute thing. Dan's a trooper. I asked him this morning because he and I were supposed to meet with someone here in New York. He was going to be traveling up and on the train going home when we're
Yikes!
having the show. So I didn't want to overburden him. But then the person we were supposed to meet with actually ended up getting COVID because that's still out there. Just in
Whoa.
case you didn't know, it's still out
So
there.
people still get sick,
People
and
still get
yeah,
sick.
it's not a good idea
It's not
to
as bad.
discount
Like
it. Well,
everybody shot up, but it's not
I know, but
the same,
let's just say it'll still take you out for a little while at
and it
least.
and it and it still impacts business. So,
Speaking of
yeah,
impacts, Dan,
impacts.
welcome.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad you can make it. Sorry, we're talking about sickness right when you come in, but it has nothing
No.
to do with you. That's I'm sure.
Well, it is why I'm here, to be fair. Thank you for both of you for having me on. It's good to be on. I did catch a bit of your show last time it was on a couple of weeks ago, I think, after Larry mentioned it to me. I put it on while I was making lunch.
He's the guy. He's the guy on the.
Yeah,
the,
so
the
you're
view.
one of
He's the view.
our 3 or 4 viewers.
Right. He's the view.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Speaking
well,
of which,
like and subscribe.
I know
whatever.
Larry is very charismatic and influential to a certain extent. However, though, tell us what motivates you to potentially be here. Besides, well, I got nothing else better to do right now.
I it's half I got nothing else better to do right now, and half because it's always fun to hang out with the other nerds. And one of the only downsides to the work from home thing is you don't end up wasting time talking about whatever you want to talk about. Even these meetings that they're scheduled for 45 minutes and they run for 2 hours. That's because the work got away from you, not because you sat around with a cup of coffee talking about databases or whatever. So it is always fun to hang out with the nerd crew, and Turnberry does give us some opportunities for that. We went down to a coding boot camp a couple of weeks ago, and one of the guys on our team, Larry and I's, he made a speech, and then we hung out with the eager up and coming React.js developers for an hour, and that was a lot of fun because
the kiddies.
Yeah, well, and we do the crew program, but this was actually an external a group that does. I'll get a link to their site. I forget the name of them, but they do good work. They're
Zip Code Delaware.
Zip Code Delaware.
Oh, nice.
They're in Wilmington. It's about 40 minutes south for me and Mike, our supervisor, and we hopefully will have a partnership with them where we contribute to a portion of their costs in exchange for first dibs at their graduates to kind of build the crew as Lazarus up.
That's a great idea.
And that's the way it works now. And that's how Aaron got involved with them. Was he was through that program and then hired by I forget who, and I'm not going to pitch another company. And then now he's back doing speeches and lightweight TA kind of work for them, and trying to lean on us to make it more of an official partnership so that we can get that benefit of guiding the next generation. And we're going to need a bunch of .NET people next year, so might as well train up 40. It'll be, if we can run it nicely, it will be a great addition to the things that we're trying to do business-wise.
Great idea. The kids today have a lot more resources than we used to back when we're trying to find our ways into this. That's for sure.
Just the internet. I remember trying to learn from a book, and I didn't. All I had was. You remember the dial-up services that just did email? You didn't even have internet. That's all I had. It was just email.
Yes.
Wildcat, right? Do you remember the Wildcat BBSs?
Oh yeah. I
had
Juno.
Oh, Juno. Okay. I remember Juno. I had Juno. I had CompuServe, Juno. I tried to resist AOL until everyone said, but everyone went over there, and I'm like, okay, fine.
I remember CompuServe, and
because you had to pay for all those individual.
One of my buddies was early into AOL. He's working at Microsoft now, and I mean it was a, it's one of those things. He got on and started a community, and and was chatting with people about things. And Usenet, you remember Usenet?
Usenet,
of course. Usenet, and then Usenet and IRC. IRC is just Usenet on speed.
Yeah. Well, so there was a so out of there was a Hotel California was a BBS, an internet BBS, right? Because it was one of those things that when everyone moved onto the internet from their colleges, Hotel California was an internet BBS out of
you can check in, but you just can't never leave.
yeah, you can't check out. It's it was out of
There's no disconnect support.
Mississippi State. Mississippi State. It was while I was going to Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi, and they had this big group, and actually a group of us got together. This was like pre anything, and went down to New Orleans. You know, a big like 15 or 20 people got together that we met on the internet. This was way back in the 90s.
You met online.
Met online. Yeah, it was kind of pre.
I didn't, they didn't exactly call it. There was only a few people that actually called it the internet back then. That was the thing. For a lot of the stuff, even when it was like the networking stuff that we were working on, the so-called ARP network, the Department of Defense bits, that because I was with Reuters, so they were looking at it, and they were looking at it like, yeah, that's not secure. That'll never make it.
Right.
Reuters. Well, we know what happened to Reuters. They sort of bet against it. They're like, because you know the story of Reuters. Stories they've been doing like the essentially computer trading, essentially computer say finance work going back to the 60s when the first big blues were getting out there, and they were like one of the first big vax users that were all over the place in Hauppauge, Long Island. I think they still have their huge facilities out there for stuff, but I'm not sure if that's still there. That'd be interesting to know if Reuters still has that. But that was the thing. They said, look, we're secure. We have all our stuff. We know what's going on. We can be better at it.
We'll create a dedicated network.
Right. The salespeople said, well, those guys in Bloomberg and all the rest are going to be using the internet. They're going to have problems with that. It's not going to work. And it's like, well, but they have these features. What will it cost us to have those features? And then the developers were like, well, if you do it now, it'll cost you $40 million. They're like, $40 million. Really? It's like, well, because it turned out, he said, we're not competing against those guys. We're competing against companies sort of like, well, people that we know today, Sprint and those kind of folks.
Right.
We were competing against the telcos who were beginning to put fiber and other things out there. They said, if we're using infrastructure now, we need to either buy into them or be them or sell to them. And it's and our estimate's 40 million, and we're in charge. And they're like, oh, we just spent 40 million on Globex. We're not doing that. We know what happened after that. So,
well, and
they bet against it.
There's so many companies out there that did that. One thing that I was going to bring up, Dan was associated with Rackspace back in the day.
Oh boy!
Oh,
and
that's right.
you remember Rackspace was cutting edge. I mean, they were the first.
Who was there? My friend Todd Clint used to work there at Rackspace too.
Yeah,
it was Todd Clint and company. Yeah,
they were the cloud before there was a cloud.
That's right.
Yeah. So.
You were that was the model for how we're doing stuff today. It was one of the first models.
The managed colo with like the anonymous managed colo,
right?
And then that eventually just became managed servers as a service. So I don't know if I'm the perfect age or if I've just gotten very, very lucky, but I went to the first fully wired college campus, RPI, the first non Ivy League to be part of Internet 2, which was, as you say, the separate network. Exactly. And then I worked for SoftLayer, which was the upstart competitor to Rackspace that started. SoftLayer was the first company to ever offer a hybrid automated cloud, and that was a month and a half after EC2s came out. So I was kind of there when the cloud was born, and I was on the first fully automated.
The cloud as we know it, that is.
The cloud as we know it, right? Yeah. And what set SoftLayer apart, their competitive differentiator, they're now IBM Kyndryl, like number 5 in the cloud space. And IBM's data center division recently split and then remerged. They're like the Terminator of data centers. I don't know what their current status is. But at the time that I was there, which was 2006-ish, their deal was a fully API-driven data center with software that didn't support it at the time. So we had a guy, Bill Francis, who's a very talented C developer and ex-Army sergeant. He wrote a network card driver that could register itself as a CD drive on the motherboard, so we could load ISOs of Windows into the RAM on the network card and then do the install to the hard drive,
without
so
having
that
to
we
touch
could
it,
have,
essentially.
right, because otherwise we were paying these poor guys to roller skate down these huge rows full of servers and pop a CD into a drive that only exists for the one time a year that the drive tray opens.
Right.
And that sort of thing, and then combined, we did that kind of thing combined with IPMI power strips, so we could hard reboot systems by literally cutting the power to the rack. And all of that went together to be the first kind of shoestring, properly run, API-driven data center. And then Amazon and all the rest came in and kind of stole our thunder, unfortunately, because it was SoftLayer and the Planet and companies like that, especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Yeah.
The Planet, right? So there was a guy that founded the Planet, Lance Crosby, who then he left the Planet, went on to found SoftLayer, and then did a bunch of other things after that. So it was kind of him that seeded those businesses around the Central Texas area. But interestingly, one of my first real strong memories of Rackspace, which is what Larry brought up to start this whole long segue, we were at a place in Dallas called the Infomart, which is a beautiful all glass building that's modeled after the Crystal Palace from the Chicago World's Fair, and it's got this all interesting history, but it's inconveniently located, so now it's just data center space. So you have this huge, beautiful glass building that people would love to go to every day, and it's just computers and surly nerds. And we were sitting there. I had to go. Yeah. I had to go to every server delivery for the first few years of when I worked at SoftLayer, because I'm 6'6" and 350 pounds. So I'm the only person who can rack the servers into the top slot of a 32U rack without.
Man.
So they would
leave
leave the
claim to fame there.
Yeah, a very, very dubious claim to fame, but I know for a fact that I touched 1/32 of all of the servers they sold between these years, because nobody else had the stool to get up there and put them in. So I was at the data center racking servers, and we heard this big loud bang. And it was because a delivery truck had veered off the Dallas North Tollway and crashed through the concrete barrier, over the alley, and crashed into Rackspace's power pop on the third floor of their data center.
Oh.
So they had a triple redundant, fully backed up and hardened power point of presence 60 feet off the ground that got hit by a truck.
So much, the best, as I say, the best laid plans of mice and men.
Right. And it reminds me of, you remember when, this is going to sound like a crazy segue, but you remember the lion tamers in Vegas, Siegfried and Roy? And when Siegfried got attacked by the tiger, they weren't insured for that, because what are the odds of the most famous lion tamer in the world being attacked by a lion? Just like, what are the odds of this thing? It's way the hell up on the building. How could it possibly be hit by a truck? Well, it can. But I didn't work for them at the time, and the building's made of glass. So we just got whiskey, and we just sat there watching across the way as they just scrambled in the dark for hours and hours trying to restore services. So then 15, 20 years later, the internet startup that I was working for got bought by Rackspace, and I had to experience those kinds of events from the inside, which is less fun.
Sure.
Oh, wow.
Well, I mean,
talk about history here.
Yeah, if you think about it, though, Rackspace and companies like that they saw an opportunity and they jumped in and they started exploiting it, and then bigger companies like you said, Amazon and Microsoft. Microsoft has very specific hardware now that is, they're addressable CPUs where they can actually, in a full rack, they can decide how many CPUs go to which memory banks, and it's strange how far we've come from those early days, because these larger companies were able to put enough money in there to get specially built hardware, as opposed to the one that there's is it 35 drives? There's a backup company that I use. I'll put a link in the notes, but
Sure.
But they use off the shelf hardware, right? I mean, they're building their servers, and They just back things up with, off the shelf components.
I'm going to say that the folks like Intel and AMD were on top of a lot of what was going on behind the scenes, if not actually innovating from that stuff to create essentially chips that did exactly what you did with your MacGyver kit. They were saying, well, if MacGyver can do it, damn, we can make a product out of it and freaking sell it.
So we would literally spend every other Friday at work, every Friday afternoon, instead of doing something like this. As a company, we would sit down with pizzas and label makers, and we would print out 3 copies of the same barcode. We put one on the server, and then one at each end of the network cable, and then set them aside. And we would do that for the whole 60,000 server setup. And it was I was 22 or whatever, and it was a startup, and it was a great time, I thought. But looking back on it now, they've come manufactured with the QR code right on them. It's automatically scanned by the machine when you rack it into the thing, or when the robot racks it into the server. They no longer have to rely on the biggest guy in the company not getting sick to get their servers racked.
They have a robot. They have a robot version of you now.
They have a robot for that.
Well, I know this because that's one of the things that I'm working with, essentially, where factory floors literally reconfigure themselves on the fly based on the successes or failures that happen in their digital twin that are doing the same things. And it's ridiculously automated. It's baby Skynet, definitely, flexing its muscles, to be sure. At some point, though, the little claw that puts in the hood is going to, decide that it has something better to do. Who knows? But yeah.
Well, and it's back to your story. And I'm sorry, it was I said 35 drops. It's Backblaze. Is the company that I was thinking of. Backblaze. They have you can actually. Anyway, check out Backblaze. We'll talk about them at another time, because one of the things I wanted to get back to, though, Dan, you mentioned that it was an API driven. That was infrastructure as code, right? Before
that was a fashionable thing to say. Code.
Right. Well, to be fair to the terminology, it was a SOAP-based object model with 60,000 WSDLs, and it took a separate SDK to work with. But it worked great. We had a dedicated developer who started as one of our senior developers, and then morphed into kind of a community relationships and development documentation kind of person, who is still doing well in roles like that at StackPath. So he stayed in that same kind of advocating kind of role. But we had a person who was good at that, and we had a developer blog where, if you can Google for my old usernames, you might find some old arguments I had about PHP and network management. And it led to a lot of good, I have a couple of patents in things like automated firewall management from a web interface. That's a foundational. I was going to say,
with all that stuff, somebody better be getting a patent, because it's like I said, MacGyver would be a different fellow if he decided to patent stuff that he did, because he could have.
Yeah, bubblegum and a paperclip, and you can make a rocket ship. That's a patentable idea.
That's patentable. I swear, man. You're pretty much done.
Right.
So IBM licensed one of them, and the other one went nowhere. But that's a fun thing to have as a 25, 26-year-old. When somebody says, what can you bring to the company? Well, I have a patent in the cloud. One of the slices of it. It's not a big slice, but
that's better than a badge or any kind of little thing that shows, frankly.
I have never been certified by a cloud provider, and every time my boss tries to force me to, I pull that card. So I'll certify him.
Yeah. I'm pre-certified. Just leave me alone.
I was there when it was born. I'm like an annoying aunt. Like, oh, it's okay. I was there the whole time.
Yeah, I used to change your diapers.
Yeah. No, I remember the cloud. It actually caught fire. It burned Greg Bach's eyebrows off. I was there for that. I don't need to be certified.
I used to rack the cloud, right? I built the cloud. What are you talking about needing to be
physically and logically?
Like I said, the cloud as we know it, because there was that other Larry Ellison-y thing that said, hey, he sort of had the idea, but he says, this is my idea, except I control it all. It's like, no, not so much, Larry. We're not going to do that. And that was the idea.
So what's next? I mean, if we look back, we've seen this evolution. I mean, now we're moving into low code, right? Platform as a service, software as a service with the chat GPT.
Services as service.
I mean,
Right.
where do we go from here? I mean, what's next?
Well, one interesting part about these new services, especially the machine learning based services, is almost all of the cloud providers say explicitly in the terms of service that they will take your data to use for further training, whether you like it or not, even if their marketing material says that they won't. And that kind of thing is going to potentially drive a situation where somebody like NBC and all of their subsidiaries goes off of the cloud for any analytics and machine learning based activity, which is going to potentially drive more of the old school data center and colo market, especially now as people are not working from home. So imagine nobody's leaving the Comcast building. Comcast, as everybody at Turnberry knows, is a little bit eager to keep people on site. But if the building across from them suddenly goes empty and they can't go to the cloud for their analytics, guess what's going to fill that building? Hardware that somebody has to manufacture that's not associated with Amazon. So
you see the pendulum swinging back the other way. That's interesting.
For certain things, we have edge distribution networks, and we have pre-processing, especially for media and entertainment companies. Like a lot of those TV studios never made it to the cloud just because of the tremendous amount of data that they've been using. Right. Hospitals have the same problem. A single MRI is like 8 terabytes worth of data, so they have all kinds of snowball nodes and things like that, which is Amazon's edge storage.
Got to be on the edge to work properly. Exactly.
But and then now that we have these companies that they're big enough to have edge nodes because they've hit the bandwidth limitation. Now they're hitting a legal limitation of we don't want Amazon to have access to all of the voice prints that went through the stupid remote that Gary Busey shouts into for that commercial. That's got to go somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
And it could go to the cloud, but then the cloud provider reserves the right to own those audio files and do with them as they will, including the data within them, which might be sensitive or protected or just not for your competitors.
Right. So what about? I mean, do you see appliances for training purposes where you have your local data and someone brings in an appliance and they attach it to your data and do the training right there and give you a model? I mean, something like that. Because
I think something like that, or local machine learning environments, some kind of on-prem data science playground as a service or as a deliverable from a product team like ours, Larry. To be able to say, give us access to this many cores with this much RAM, and we'll guarantee you a training environment for up to 4 machine learning people based on Kubernetes or VMware or whatever. And have that, I got to write that down now that I've said that out
loud. Quickly patent that
TM,
one.
Baby, TM. So no, so if you think about it, if you back up, Google used to ship, search engines, right? You could buy a Google search engine, and those were actually Dell, precision servers that just had a cool front end on them. Do you think that we might get to the point that maybe it's a AI as a service, and we'll bring in our compute engine and attach it to your on-prem data.
Right, that's going to be interesting too. If that happens, do you want, what's going to be the business model? Are you going to lease them, or is it going to be quarterly training sessions of no longer than X days or whatever? And shipping, sometimes, even today, shipping drives is the cheapest and most effective option. We had at a previous company, one of my clients was a guy who was a photographer and ran a very successful photography studio with a number of subordinates. And he was in Sydney when COVID struck and Australia locked down, and he was not legally allowed to leave Australia for months, and he had to deal with transfer times of these gigabyte-sized photography files from an S3 located in Virginia. And the cost to do the replication to the Southeast Asian market or to the Sydney data center was ridiculous. We ended up paying one of our engineers to drive to Virginia and plug in at the Amazon business office and fill up 20 terabytes of hard drives and then wrap them in bubble wrap and ship them to Australia. And that was the cheapest way to get that data across the world.
Even the Microsoft Fast Track program still will send out big drives when they're doing their migrations and stuff like that.
You mentioned
they
Snowball.
have Infrastructure City there. They have everything that's out there, and if they at that scale still consider it viable, you know that problem has yet to be solved.
Right.
Well, I mean, physicists for a long time have been sending around, just especially from the colliders, right? All the different super conducting colliders. Sorry. Anyway, I'll.
You know what I mean?
You know what I mean? No, they've been shipping whole machines that you just connect to your network that has all the data because it's too big. It's too much to transfer.
Data is that big that it's even with all the speed, it's like, well, how can data still be big? I thought they solved this. I thought we have not right now when we hear just the phones doing 5Gs or just our little Eero units doing all this stuff. They're like, with that kind of power, and we're watching movies, essentially, we're downloading DVDs in a matter of less than under a minute. How much data is out there? So you will not, and try to explain to people, you may not understand what's been going on. People haven't been sitting on just the same data and using it over and over. No, it's been multiplying beyond what you think. There's a lot more
Moore's
data
law
out
hits
there.
Data as well, right?
Business, what we've been capturing. We're capturing all kinds of stuff these days. We're keeping all this stuff. This is not pack rat stuff. This is beyond that. This is essentially like life, organisms just essentially exploding into the planet.
For AI to work, you have to have training data, and training data is best when it's huge, when it's large.
Yep.
So
that's right. But of course, yep.
That data that everybody says, I've got my phone and I can watch, 8 episodes of Friends in a quarter of a second. None of that data is going end to end. All of that starts at the edge.
Exactly.
When you're watching Netflix and you say, I want to watch the newest thing, I want to watch the new Knives Out, which is good, by the way. When you click that button, it comes from a server that might be less than a mile from you. It might be at the nearest presence. And the problem with the problem that I described earlier is none of that data is cached at the edge. It all has to go all the way from Virginia all the way to Sydney, and that's where the problem is. Because if it was already on Netflix, it's already done. It's already been sent to Sydney and Tokyo and everywhere else.
And so that's what we're selling. A lot of our big companies are out there selling that. So like, well, and then so some of these companies are like, well, so why should we get that stuff? The case of the truck will never hit that top of the building over here. It's like, since when will that happen? So okay, you're going to have we're going to tell you right now, you're going to have a lot of data one day, and you're going to want to move it one day. I'll never move my data. Why would I ever do that? It's like, it will happen. It will come. It's like, oh, I don't know, insurance or one of those kind of things that you buy that's inconvenient. It's one of those things that you become part of the checklist. If you want to, I think even if you want to sell stocks in the stock market, they're going to say, well, are you practicing this stuff? Are you with these standards? Otherwise, we won't even let you be on our exchange because looks like you might kill yourself, and we're going to have a big nasty trading day thanks to your stuff. You got to watch out for that because other people are looking, because people can see what you're doing.
So what's going to happen soon is that the technologists that are involved in architecting all of that are going to become liable for those data losses. I mean,
if they're still alive.
There we go.
If they're still alive, yeah. Well,
if they're still around, exactly. So this is the key. It's like something. If it happens, it's like it should not be the case of well, I was skimping on the money. In a lot of cases, I've heard a lot of that. It's like, well, somebody decided to get cheap. Oh, I'm not going to call them cheap necessarily, but I'm going to call them well, we can wait. We're okay. Yeah. We got time. We got a window. Would be the case of the Southwest systems that they're trying to fix. Apparently, you went
there. See, I wasn't going to go there.
You were going to go there? I had to go there. I had to go there because Southwest is something I used to use all the time. And then I noticed that I was having issues with scheduling. And some of this, I'm like, I think I'm just going to go pay the premium way of going things, but at least I'm assured that I'm getting what I need, essentially. So I paid premium to go what I need. And plus my company said, no, we prefer these guys. Again, like when they say, we're going to go with someone that we know is not going to hurt you if something bad happens in the quote unquote environment of the world. And so that was the case of Southwest. apparently, like right now, they announced a new CTO, I think, or one of those high level persons that are going to be taking care of those systems. Apparently, they had her in mind already. She was ready to go in the wings. They were just taking their time getting there, like no rush to get her. Maybe they didn't want to pay her. I don't know what it is, but they should have brought her in when they found her. They should have put her in right away. But anyways, she's out there now. She's in, but too late. Damage is done. The rep has been hurt, and all that fun stuff, all that great, stuff that they were doing that made them really popular suddenly becomes like a, late night joke now, if you want to call it that. It's not so nice.
Dan was talking earlier about, IBM keeps they keep morphing and coming around. The reason that they are not going to die is the whole thing. You never get fired by bringing in IBM, because it might not be the best thing that
that's
you've ever
true,
had.
but they're also not doing things like that are shooting themselves in the foot either. Like, trying here's the new Coke version of IBM. They don't do that. They might do a Lotus Notes things once in a while, but not even that is still very small compared to their really big value prop.
And
they've always kept it up.
IBM's history has always been that they are slower than everyone else, but they still get there and they get to the right place. And they've always been deliberate and they've always been strategic. I mean, in 1956, a typewriter manufacturer in Michigan named themselves International Business Machines and has not needed to change that name. So they've been thinking ahead the whole time. And yeah, you still need to wear a suit when you're a VP at IBM, and I don't want to do that, but it would be nice to be a VP at IBM.
Yes,
it's true. I mean, hey, it'd be nice to have a suit.
It's not.
I haven't had a good suit in a long time. Just saying.
But as far as software and practices and things like that going, they're not leading. They're not cutting edge. But they are, as you say, they are deliberate. They will get you there.
Well, they try to be cutting edge in very, very specific niches. Remember when IBM made the fastest supercomputer in the world, and they had Deep Blue beating Garry Kasparov and winning Jeopardy in the same month? But when was the last time you thought about Garry Kasparov?
Yeah.
My daughter talks about it.
That's not chess classes. But that is, I think personally, I look at that as marketing more than their consulting arm. Their consulting arm is all about being, consistent. We will come in and we might not be the fastest. We're definitely not going to be the cheapest, but you will get what you've asked for.
You get what you asked for.
Right.
You're assured. The assurance is much higher for us than you would for, say, the fly-by-night, the startup, or the even the ones that are company, famous but with not as good as a rep as we have.
Yeah, well, any company that's a consulting firm, that is smaller than they are. They're, I mean, that there's a reason that they still put people out there.
There's a reason why they're still big too. They even when they shed, and it seems like, oh my God, they shed this much or they did this much. You know what? You look at their big picture, and sometimes some people forget how.
There's a reason that they have a cloud presence as well. I mean, IBM's cloud. I've only, and I've been doing this for a long time, right? We all have. I've only dealt with one customer that was on their cloud, but they were fanatic about staying on that cloud because they got what they wanted and they knew what they wanted, and they were sure that they were getting exactly what they needed from that, IBM cloud vendor.
Telling a person to get out of his Maserati just to go into a Volkswagen, no matter how cool the Volkswagen is, and no matter what souped up stuff you put in there, no way, it's not going to happen.
And there's a certain amount of reassurance in the fact that no matter who you are, you won't influence IBM's roadmap. So,
yes.
There are a lot of cloud providers, and I was in a lot of meetings where a lot of promises were made, and then a slightly bigger dollar number floated across the table, and those first promises are not as valuable anymore, and we'll handle that when it comes up. And you can't do that to IBM. The only way to change IBM strategy is for the world to change unexpectedly, or the federal government to make some kind of ridiculous demand. Both of which has happened, and IBM responded to it properly. But if you go with IBM, you get that consistent, slow moving but always correct answer, and the roadmap they give you is set in stone, and the stone that they set it in is harder than all the other stones.
True, right. And far reaching too, far reaching. They have the roadmaps that are not like, what's going to happen in the next 12 months. That's not the kind of roadmap you get when you get from IBM.
They've not had, and I look back in my past, and I'm a Microsoft head, right? I love it, but they burned me on Silverlight. They burned me on Windows Phone, and you can't look at IBM and say, "Wow,
you burned yourself on Windows Phone."
I burned myself on Windows. I love Windows.
I miss my Windows Phone. I still miss it.
Have you looked into Blazor?
Yes.
Oh yes.
Okay.
We had talked about Blazor. Yes.
I just learned about it last week, and that apparently is. It was we don't need to talk about it again. I heard about it from the guy I was interviewing. He said it was kind of a Silverlight replacement, which is why I brought it up.
it's WASM, right? WebAssembly. It's cool. There's a lot of good.
It's beyond Silverlight replacement, because the whole point of it was to what Microsoft wanted to do was disengage from their specific clienty products. They really wanted to be with the web, which is why they're friends with everybody lately, even the folks that we deem are their competitors. But here they are working, and they have people staffed with the high billing rates working with those folks, giving them stuff. So why is that happening? Why are enemies working so closely together? I said mainly because in the end, everyone will get what they want out of it, and have made done the math, and said, I don't care if he gets this little piece, it's still not going to be equal to what I can get.
And as long as the pie grows, my piece
it'll
is
be
still
mine.
Bigger.
They can keep their little. They can go play in their playground. This is mine.
Google did that very famously, where they would interview somebody and then say, we'll give you a job, but we want you to interview with Microsoft first, because I think that they would get more of a benefit from your skill set. And when the cloud grows, everybody grows, and we're 80% of the cloud. So
that's right. And you become our customer.
Yeah.
And you become our customer by being that person. I actually told him that. I was like, well, you know what? If you have a choice with that, I'd rather you be my customer than to be my employee, because at least I'm going to be sure that I'm not going to fire you.
Well, honestly, that is, and not to tout the people that I currently work for, but that's one of the things the company I'm working for is really good about is contract to hire. I mean, we're not going to stand in the way of somebody going to work for somebody, because if you do that, then all you're doing is making two enemies, right? That's so last century.
Yeah, we have right to offer on all of our stuff. All of our places are right to offer.
I just installed. I'm doing some prep work for a class, and I just installed the OpenJDK from Microsoft. Microsoft has a version of the OpenJDK, and the Java development kit for those youngsters out there that don't know what that is. That's for Java. And what's interesting to me, what tickled me pink, what just made me laugh hysterically when I was doing it, maniacally even, is that C#, the language that I've been programming in for over 20 years, is the language of spite. If you don't know the history, C# came about because at the time Sun, which owned Java before it was purchased by Oracle, Sun and Microsoft were working together, and Microsoft put out something they called J++, which was an extension, which was Java with some extra Microsofty bits to make it work.
About this to somebody yesterday, in fact.
And someone was like, no, you can't do that. Java's ours.
That's
cannot
right.
extend it. And so Microsoft said, okay,
fine,
you take that and we'll build our own language. And that's where C#.
That's where C# and .NET came about. They essentially, and I remember I was at Tech Ed 1996. Yeah, I'm aging myself too. We were in LA. Everyone was fun. They had this beautiful program built with J++. I found it much easier to do, by the way, than C++.
Yes.
At the time, right? And the thing was like, and I remember learning Java at the time also. And it's like the thing that I hated was the AWT, that interface was like ugly.
Swing. Swing was the reason that I didn't. It was not a Java.
I couldn't deal with it. And then here was Microsoft said, you can have that, but we're going to put our famous front end on top of it. And I said, I'm sold. And they had an art program that till today, I think only Adobe has come to equal what it could do in freaking the 90s. It was powerful. You could do animation with it. It had all kinds of abilities. It was the original. This would have been. It was going to be the original replacement of Paint. It was called Illustrator, I think it was what it was called. And I think Adobe did ended up taking the name Illustrator from it because Microsoft let it go. It was built in J++. They had to give it up. And I remember every program I heard from Microsoft at the time, in just going into 96, just before that, they were saying, oh, we're learning Java. We're learning Java. And I was like, oh, I better learn Java because all the developers keep telling me that's what they're doing. Because I had, you remember the C++ books? You remember how they would take up in the wall, that huge rack? I still have it over here.
Mine are down there, yeah.
It's going to, one day it's going to find its way to the center of the earth because of the weight, but it's out there. And then they were saying, get to Java stuff. And I looked at Java stuff and it was a lot less books because it was still books, right? But for more importantly, they were out on those hard floppies. It's like the stack was half as much, but it did a lot more. And I was all game and I was saying, I need to learn it. I'm going to go take classes. I was starting to learn it. And then came the pull the rug from out of you.
Yeah. It was harsh. It was so harsh. It was interesting. But see, now Microsoft is getting the revenge because they've got the Open JDK that they're putting out, their version of Java.
It's welcome now because everyone wants to be open sourcey and
it's not their version of Java anymore, right? They basically, J++, they took the, what was it, Whitewater development kit, or
right.
There was
they sort of went against certain standards that were agreed upon in a certain sense because they felt they knew better about certain things.
They were playing fast and loose. Don't get me wrong.
Sort of not.
Microsoft is not they're not a villain, but they're also not completely pure in this scenario. It wasn't. They had
their plan. They wanted to get their stuff out there. They knew that they were going to be selling this anyway. The thing, especially with Sun was saying, you can't make something that's going to work on Windows. It's got to really work in all. So, okay, that was fine. But here's the Windows folks saying, well, could our stuff work on other systems? And they said, no, that would make them think it was Windows. No way. We're not going to do that.
We're not going to do that. So
if everyone looked at a machine and thought it was Windows, they're going to be like, no. Then everyone's going to be like buying Windows because they think it all looks the same.
Now we're there.
Now we're there.
Was a language of spite, but that's also how Redshift got its name. Redshift, the large-scale enterprise database from Amazon, is a direct reference to Oracle to shift away from Big Red. Redshift is used. That's why it's named that way.
The prophet of regret.
Yeah. Well,
man.
And when you do that, and that's back to the what's next. It's all about providing it cheaper or with features that the originator won't implement.
Mm-hmm.
The things that you really, Microsoft, Java was the right ones, test everywhere, but it really was a language that could be run in many different places, and C# was, or .NET. Sorry, I keep saying C#, but it's really the whole .NET ecosystem. It was write in any language, run in one place.
Yes,
that was the idea. So it was kind of the other direction,
right? Until they started creating the ways to make it work in those other systems. But again, their problem was like the other systems, they had to play with someone else. They didn't want to experience what happened with Sun, which was like, we went in and we played and they didn't like how we played. So they were waiting for it to be invited into the sandbox again.
Yeah, Microsoft didn't make it run everywhere else. That was done by the Mono team, Miguel.
Mono. It was an
open source initiative that was re-implementing the CLR externally, and I really wanted to, I wanted to assist in that, but I didn't feel like I could because there were some things that I had done with and at Microsoft that let me see things that I couldn't. I didn't feel like. I didn't want to be that guy. that breaks everything because of a license conflict and a non-compete or whatever that I broke.
Yeah, so that used to be very nasty back then, where like unless there was like unless you had blessings from some important types that said it, you can it wasn't, you couldn't just do it. It's like
It wasn't
Torvalds
as
and these kind of folks
open
had
source was
permission
open.
to do what they were doing.
Yeah,
Actually,
but
if you think about it, they didn't go on and went to a garage and said, I'm going to what make you guys all look bad, because at that time people were getting powerful enough that if you made them look bad, they will literally turn you off to do it. They had tacit, let's just say,
tacit approval.
tacit approval from folks to make it happen. But even that was hard to get. You had to know who the heck you have to be in the right place at the right time in some cases, right? The right people are right there to say, I know a guy, I know that guy, and go ahead and do it. Let's see what happens. And then they, of course, make money on your stuff. Oh well.
So we've got to come up with what's next, and we've got to make a lot of money so that I can,
we're trying to figure that out for everyone right over here, of course. And then Dan will go quickly and copyright it for us.
Yeah.
And patent it for us.
It's funny you say that, because I was talking about talking to those recent graduates, and one of them said he got a great idea for a new business. He's already got the prototype made, and it's gonna be a big startup for him, and that's what he's gonna do when he leaves. And I said, oh, show it to me. And he said, I've never seen anything like this for collectibles. And he shows me a price tracker for sneakers, because he's a sneaker collector. Yeah. And yeah, that's what I was like. Oh yeah. And he said, well, what do you think? Oh, that's the whole product. It's great. And he said, well, have you ever seen something like that? I said, yeah, I wrote one in 2007. Like I used to work for an auction house, which is its own separate set of stories. And I was a programmer at an auction house doing their price history and categorization algorithms, which is a lot harder for that kind of thing than it is for retail, because there's only one of each object.
Yes.
But sometimes there's not. Sometimes, and actually most of the time, turns out, an artist will paint one original and then have a bunch of prints made of the original and then paint over the prints in random spots. Okay. And then each one of those counts as an original, but it's not the original, but it's got paint on it, and that guy put the paint on it.
It's got a value, basically. Yeah.
Right, and then real collectors determine how much paint is on it versus non-paint, and the original versus the faux originals, and then the different runs of the faux originals, and then trying to categorize things. The auction house I worked for was called Heritage Auctions. They're in Dallas, which is very close, very, very close actually to where that truck hit the rack space office. It's less than half a mile.
Coincidence.
Now that I think about it. So we would get really interesting things, like Mrs. Buddy Holly came in to sell a bunch of Buddy's stuff. So like I met Mrs. Holly and I held Buddy's glasses, and like that's a great day. But one of the interesting things that I had to do was try to programmatically determine which auction would produce the most value for an item, because the auctions were categorized. You'd have currency auctions and you'd have Americana auctions and art auctions, and the same guys wouldn't come to each. But there's only one of a thing. So we want to sell this one thing, but for instance, there was a dollar bill signed by Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe. Categorize that. Is it currency? Is it Americana? Is it baseball memorabilia? What is it? And we've only got one. There's only ever been one.
Wow. Yes. And so you're only going to get to sell it once.
Right. And then nobody will sell it again for 80 years.
Right. Well, so even if it does get sold, it's no longer sold by you. You're working for these guys.
We hope that it is sold by us, and the whole provenance and tracking the history of an object was part of that. But that kind of thing, that's where machine learning may one day really jump in, because I could do a lot of algorithm design, but I can't test 100 scenarios. Like, what if we put all of the currencies signed by sports people in its own special sports currency auction, where both of the groups of nerds come in? It's hard, and sometimes you get, actors signing the comic books of the characters that they play. Is that entertainment? Is it comic art? Is it pop art? Is it Americana?
I think we found a ChatGPT use case where it would come up with all the various combinations that could be tested. In other words, we can come up with use cases. We can dream them up and let ChatGPT make new combinations based on everything it's seen everywhere else. And it's not creating any new knowledge. All it's doing is it's creating things to look at. Right?
What this is a lot like is because we're looking at moving, right? My son's a sophomore in high school. When he graduates, we're going to move, and so we're starting to shop around for realtors, and looking at places. And one of the things that a realtor does is when you're selling, is because we've sold houses, is they bring you comps, right? And when you're buying, they bring you comps, other properties in the area that are similar in some way, to give you an idea of whether the price is high or low. And that's really kind of, Dan, what you're talking about with the memorabilia or the auction items, is you're trying to find things that are comparable. You're trying to cluster, right? Trying to clump them and find out which cluster brings the most value. That's an interesting, cool problem.
Yeah, and you have that same, in a broader sense, we only have $1 million to spend on marketing. We've decided to go all in on a channel. Is it going to be Twitch? Is it going to be a Super Bowl commercial? Is it going to be a YouTube ad? And that kind of decision is the same thing. We have one of this item. How do we sell it? This one time it's for sale.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. Wow. Yikes. So hey, just
we've got that's two good ideas, but so one thing that I do want to say, because one of the things that we've recently done is we're starting to talk. We've got a mentor program internally. Okay, and so I'm talking to all of these fresh people, sort of like Dan, you were talking about going out to the to where you spoke, to the boot camp.
Right.
One of the things that I've been telling them, one of the things that I'm big on, I did jump into Silverlight pretty hard, and I did jump into Windows Phone, and the rug got pulled out of me. I jumped into C# when it first came out, and I've never been prouder or happier. I'm actually happy about Silverlight.
That's still a good skill.
And Windows Phone.
That hasn't gone away.
Even though the technology went away, that the things that I learned were good. I think that one of the things that we would be interesting for us to do is tell people where we think they should devote their time. What's coming out now, what's interesting that a new person that's just 2 years in, right? They're just well enough established.
Got to be clear on which role, the developer role, the so-called engineer, the so-called SME. Exactly. I want to be a SME of some sort, not Mr. SME, but SME.
So, developers are not going away. ChatGPT is not going to take development jobs.
No. That's right.
Low code, no code is not going to take developer jobs.
The so-called citizen developer, by the way, still has a day job. So guess what? We still need you.
Yeah.
And those low code, no code solutions, what they're going to take away is all the crap that developers have to deal with. All the one-off query, the VP of North American Sponge Division wants to have all the sponge sales sorted by color by the end of the day. That crap's going away.
There shouldn't have to be a call at midnight says, I can't filter my column. It's like, here, I'll come filter your column, guy.
Yeah. Right. It's the jobs that we don't want anyway.
Exactly.
Exactly right. Those
it's the jobs we don't need to have. And the idea is like you are hiring us for the brain. You're going to pay us a premium because, I'm sorry, but you got no choice. So if you're going to be using me for premium, don't make me go and bring the Tweety Bird to the store. If you're bringing me in to drive the car, I'm there and I'm doing the Daytona.
But to maintain your own mental health, understand that it is that when you lease your time to this company, and if they want to misuse the time that they've leased, that's on them. I sat next to a guy in my very first job at that auction house. He was a friend of the VP, and he was paid a ridiculous amount of money. And for about 6 months, all he did was manual OCR. He would look at a picture with a number in it, and he would type that number into a spreadsheet, and he did it all day, every day. And I was 23 or whatever.
OCR,
how do you not want to kill yourself? And he said, I got my music, I got my coffee, and if this is the way they want to spend the time that they've rented from me, that's okay. It's easier than a lot of other things I've done in my life, and
that's a good life balance.
There is a life balance. That's true. But we're going to get on a shirt that says Mr. OCR Man. That's actually that would be an interesting shirt. OCR Man. What do you do? I look at things. Yes.
And then for 6 whole months. And then we finally they finally licensed an OCR product that can handle that. It was a weird font or something. I forgot the details. That we made him do it by hand, but that was part of his job that month, that year, and he was okay with it because he knew it would end, and he knew that it wasn't his time. He leased his 8 hours, and that was fine with that, as long as he wasn't breaking a law or a moral code. If they wanted him to stare out the window for 8 hours, that's fine. He makes $1,000.
On that note, there are jobs in the internet that are actually doing that, and we know there's TikToks of people who do that and make tons of money for whatever reason. So you will find your niche. For me, though, I'm going to call this time over here because I've literally just been called to sit in to interview somebody. Speaking of bringing in new people,
Raquel's got her hand up.
Last minute, Raquel, you have a question for us? Oh, she has her hand. We're using Teams, so raise your hand. What you got, Raquel?
Oh, yes, if you find any of those jobs where you just sit around, let me know.
Hello.
Thank you.
I know, hun.
Yes,
like I tried to say, they're very skill specific, but there is the other jobs which we should start pushing a little bit more. Yeah, because Hollywood people, if you're still watching, Raquel is very, very good at what she does. I'm just saying. Remember, one Emmy, and all this is paid for.
Oh boy, that would be great.
Just saying.
All right, Dan, thank you for joining
pleasure,
us.
sir.
We are gonna have to cut it short and run away because Ralph is now
we got to scoot, but we'll do this again because we have repeat guests. It has happened.
Yeah,
sounds great. I'm glad to be back.
And then we'll see how many more patents you have in that particular time. We'll do a count. All right, so we have 2 now. So okay, that's our baseline. That's our metric. You know, obviously the pressure's on you now to come up with and double that. 50% in a year, or else, you know, we'll give you only 4 points in your bonus.
Oh, great.
Just saying. Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
It's a pleasure, everyone. Signing out, Raquel.
Thank you.